The wind was soft across the water that evening, carrying laughter from my family and friends as they enjoyed the lake. For a moment, it felt like life had finally given me peace, the kind of peace I had fought for after years of struggle. But peace has a way of being fragile. And just when you start to believe you've earned it, someone always tries to take it away. That night, it came in the form of Karen, the HOA president, marching down the slope with fury in her eyes, as if my land, my lake, and even my family's happiness belonged to her. She didn't even hesitate before pointing at my guests, demanding they leave the water immediately. That was the moment I felt something inside me twist. I'd dealt with her before, but this was different. She crossed into my soul's last safe space, and I knew she had no idea what storm she had just unleashed. It started earlier that afternoon. My brother had brought his kids over, and for the first time in years, they were smiling. You see, they'd lost their mother 2 summers ago. And the sound of their laughter was like sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. My father, old and frail, sat on the porch humming the same tune he used to sing when I was little, and I swear I hadn't seen him this alive in a long time. The lake had always been more than water to us. It was memory, healing, and connection. It was where my mother taught me how to fish, where my parents carved their initials into a cedar tree that still leaned over the shore, and where, when life felt impossible, I always found my way back. But to Karen, it wasn't memory. To her, it was territory. She strutted down like she owned the place, clutching her HOA binder like it was the law of the land, when in truth, she didn't own a square inch of my lake. She called out to my nieces, her shrill voice echoing across the water, telling them this was community property and they had no right to be there. My brother froze. My father's hum stopped, and the laughter that had filled the evening fell silent. The kids swam toward the dock, confusion written all over their little faces. That silence burned me worse than any insult she could have thrown, because I knew what she had just stolen: their joy, their moment of healing. I stood, and my voice cracked the air sharper than I expected. Karen, this is private land, my land. But she just sneered, waving a hand like my words were nothing more than background noise. That lake is part of the HOA's jurisdiction, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. Your so-called guests need to leave before I call security. My blood ran hot, but beneath it was a deep sadness. Sadness that this woman, who lived 3 houses down in a home she could never have afforded if not for her husband's inheritance, felt entitled to destroy moments that mattered more than she could ever understand. Sadness that she looked at my family, grieving children, an old man fighting for breath, and instead of compassion, she saw trespassers. But then came something else, anger, sharp and electric. Not just for me, but for everyone she had bullied in this neighborhood. The families she fined over flowers in the wrong color. The single mom she harassed for leaving her trash cans out an hour too long. The veteran she humiliated over a flagpole. I had stayed silent too long, telling myself peace was better than conflict. But not tonight. I walked right up to her, close enough to see the way her smug expression faltered when she realized I wasn't backing down. My voice was steady, almost calm, but inside I was shaking with all the years of her poison. Karen, this lake is on my deed. It has been in my family for 3 generations. Your HOA lines stop at the road and not 1 inch further. So if you want to call security, go ahead. But when they show up, they'll be on my land and they'll know you trespassed. Her face drained of color. For once, the power she always carried in her posture slipped. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but the words never came. Instead, she stood there, frozen, the binder clutched tight to her chest like a shield. Behind me, I could hear my father coughing softly, my nieces whispering to one another, my brother's footsteps crunching the gravel as he came to stand by my side. For the first time, in a long time. I didn't feel alone in this fight. Karen finally spun on her heel, muttering something about not being finished. And maybe she thought her threat carried weight. But as I watched her retreat, I realized something. She wasn't just fighting me anymore. She had waged war against my family, my history, my home. And I wasn't going to let her win. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the last streaks of sunlight fade across the lake, my father placed his weathered hand over mine. "You did right," he whispered, his voice thin but proud. "This land, it was always meant to protect us. Don't let anyone take that away." His words etched deep into me, deeper than I think he even realized. And so, as the stars blinked awake overhead, I made myself a promise. Karen thought this was over. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, the lake was still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for what was coming. I woke up early, earlier than I had in months, and walked down to the water's edge. The grass was damp beneath. My feet and the sky was painted with that quiet pink and gold only dawn can bring. Normally, this place calmed me, but my chest was tight. Karen's shadow had already begun creeping into the edges of what should have been peace. I knew her. She wasn't the kind to retreat and let things go. She was the kind to plot, to dig, to strike where she thought it would hurt the most. And I could feel it, like the weight of a storm pressing on the horizon. By the time my brother and his kids woke up, I had coffee ready. The children ran to the lake, still full of innocence, skipping rocks and laughing like nothing had happened. My father, though, wasn't fooled. He shuffled onto the porch, wrapped in his old flannel robe, eyed me the way he always did when he knew my mind was at war with itself. "She'll be back," he said simply. His voice cracked, the rasp of years and illness making every word sound heavier. "But this time, you won't stand alone." I wanted to believe him, but deep down I couldn't shake the memory of Karen's smirk. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. I went into town for supplies, and the whispers had already started. "Did you hear what Karen did? She tried to kick his family off his own lake? Unbelievable." A few folks gave me sympathetic nods, but I could feel their fear too. People had lived under her thumb so long they'd forgotten how to fight back. She ruled through intimidation, letters, fines, public shaming during HOA meetings. And now she had chosen me as her new target. When I returned home, sure enough, there was a bright orange notice nailed right to my dock. My stomach sank as I ripped it off and read the words, "HOA violation, unauthorized use of community resources. Fine pending review." My hands shook with fury. She wasn't just trying to scare me. She was building a case, twisting the law to her advantage, as she always did. And I knew how this would go. Meetings, votes, endless paperwork, where truth became irrelevant, and her voice always carried the loudest. My brother found me standing there, the paper crumpled in my fist. His jaw tightened when he read it. "She's pushing you," he muttered. "She's trying to break you down until you give up." He wasn't wrong. That was Karen's way. She thrived on weakness, fed off of fear. But something inside me hardened then, something stronger than the anger boiling in my chest. She had picked the wrong family this time. That night, I dug out the old deed, the original one my grandfather signed when he first purchased the land nearly 70 years ago. The edges were yellowed, but the ink was bold. And in black and white, it spelled out the truth. The lake, the dock, the shoreline, all of it was private property. My family's property. I traced the words with my fingers, feeling my grandfather's spirit in the room, steady and unyielding. He had fought for this land once. Now it was my turn. But I also knew Karen wouldn't stop at paperwork. She would rally her little army, the HOA board members who jumped at her every command. She would twist lies into truth, and neighbors too afraid to stand against her would stay silent. So I decided I wouldn't fight this alone. The next day, I invited a few neighbors over. People who had been victims of Karen's tyranny for years. The single mom who got fined because her son left his bike on the lawn. The veteran who had been forced to repaint his house 3 times because Karen didn't like the shade of blue. The elderly couple fined hundreds because their granddaughter drew chalk art on the sidewalk. They sat in my living room, quiet at first, the weight of their own shame keeping them from speaking. Karen had made them feel small, powerless. But then, one by one, the stories came pouring out. Tears, frustration, anger that had been bottled up for years spilled into the room. And as I listened, something shifted. It wasn't just about my lake anymore. It was about every family she had hurt, every joy she had stolen. This wasn't only revenge, it was justice. When my father spoke, the room fell silent. His voice was weak, but his words cut sharp. Bullies win when good people stay quiet. But when you stand together, even the loudest tyrant loses her power. His eyes, tired but burning with pride, met mine. It's time. That night, I sat by the lake again, the crickets singing their steady rhythm, the stars reflected in the still water. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of Karen's threats. I was ready. She thought she had the upper hand, but what she didn't understand was this. My family had been forged in storms harder than her. We had survived loss, heartbreak, and years of struggle, and we would not bend to her will. She had tried to humiliate us, to strip away the one place that brought us peace. But instead, she had given us something else, a reason to rise. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. And by the time the day arrived, I could feel the tension simmering in my chest like a kettle about to boil over. Karen had made sure words spread through the neighborhood, framing the whole ordeal as though I was some kind of outlaw hogging community resources. Flyers had been slipped into mailboxes, whispers carried across fences, and by the time I walked into that small clubhouse at the end of the street, every chair was filled. All eyes turned to me, half curious, half afraid, some silently cheering me on, but too cautious to show it. Karen sat at the head of the long table like a queen, presiding over her court. Her binder was open, papers neatly stacked, lips painted in that sharp crimson that always seemed to bleed arrogance. When she saw me, her smirk curled slow and deliberate, like she'd already won. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole room, "we're here to address your unauthorized use of community property." My fists tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had brought the deed, folded carefully in my jacket pocket, but I knew this fight wasn't only about documents, it was about perception. Karen thrived on turning truth upside down, and she had done it so many times before. She started her tirade, listing accusations one after another. Violation of HOA rules, unauthorized gatherings, excessive noise from the lake, even potential liability issues. The room buzzed as she spoke, some neighbors nodding along simply because her voice carried authority. My father sat in the back row, his hands folded over his cane. His presence a quiet anchor holding me steady. When Karen finally paused, I stood. My voice cracked at first, but then something stronger took over. "This lake," I began, holding up the deed, "is not community property. It's private. My family's, it has been for 3 generations. This paper here proves it. Every inch, every right, every memory tied to it belongs to us. You may control the road, the sidewalks, even the color of mailboxes. But you do not control this." Gasps filled the room, whispers breaking out as I handed copies of the deed to the board members. Karen's face paled, but her composure held for the moment. "Anyone can forge documents," she snapped, her voice shrill. Now, the cracks in her confidence beginning to show. "We'll have to verify this." "That's fine," I said. "Steady. Verify it. Take it to the county. Dig through every record you want. because the truth doesn't bend for your convenience. And then, before she could cut me off, I turned to the crowd, the neighbors who had sat quietly for too long. How many of you have been fined, harassed, humiliated for small things? A garden gnome, a bike, a flag, even chalk drawings. The silence that followed was deafening. People shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes. But then, slowly, hands began to rise. First, the single mom, then the veteran, then the elderly couple. And suddenly, the room wasn't silent anymore. It was alive with voices, with grievances that had been bottled up for years. Karen's smile faltered. She tapped her binder, papers trembling slightly in her hands, but her words no longer carried the same sharp weight. She shouted about order and procedure, but the tide had turned. The fear she thrived on was breaking apart like ice in spring. For the first time, she looked cornered when the meeting ended. No decision was made, but the air had shifted. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact with me now shook my hand. Some patted me on the back. A few whispered thank yous under their breath. My father's eyes glistened as he leaned on his cane and whispered, "That's the beginning." But as I walked out into the cool night, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't surrender, they scheme. And true enough, the very next day, she made her move. I woke up to the sound of engines. 2 HOA hired security guards stood at the edge of my dock, their trucks blocking the road to my property. One of them held a clipboard. "Sir, we've been instructed to restrict access to the lake until this matter is resolved," he said flatly, like his words weren't designed to cut. My nieces, who had just come out with their fishing poles, froze in confusion. My brother stormed forward, ready to lash out, but I stopped him, because in that moment I understood something. Karen was desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. I looked at the guards, calm but firm. "You're standing on private land. This isn't HOA territory. And if you don't move those trucks right now, I'll have the sheriff down here in less than 10 minutes. They hesitated. I could see it in their eyes. Doubt. Fear of being caught in the middle of something bigger than they signed up for. After a tense pause, they backed off, muttering something about just following orders. And there it was, Karen's latest attempt at control, crumbling in real time. But I knew she would keep coming, keep pressing until either I broke or she did. That night, sitting by the lake with my father beside me, I felt the weight of it all settle heavy on my shoulders. But he laid a trembling hand over mine, his voice soft but unshakable. "Son, this fight isn't just for us anymore. It's for everyone she's ever hurt. Don't let her scare you. Don't let her win." I stared out at the water, stars glittering across its surface like shards of hope. Karen thought she was playing a game of control, but what she didn't know was that I wasn't playing anymore. This was war. The war truly began the following week. By Monday morning, I could see Karen's fingerprints all over the neighborhood. A mass email blasted out by the HOA board accused me of endangering the safety of residents by restricting access to the lake. Flyers appeared on doorsteps warning about liability issues. And worse, Karen had twisted the narrative so hard that some neighbors began to doubt me. A few who had quietly supported me after the meeting now avoided my eye. That's how she worked, not with truth, but with fear and whispers. I tried to hold steady, but the pressure was crushing. My nieces asked why the lake lady hated them. My brother snapped more than once, ready to confront her in ways that would only make things worse. And my father. He grew weaker. Each night he sat by the water, staring out at the reflection of the stars, quieter than before. Sometimes I caught him coughing so hard it bent him double. Every time, guilt clawed at me. Was I making things harder for him? Was this fight draining the last bits of peace from his life? On Wednesday, it escalated. I came home from work. to find my dock wrapped in yellow tape like a crime scene. A laminated sign read, "Access restricted. Pending HOA review." My blood ran hot. She had no right, no legal ground. But that never stopped her before. She was betting on intimidation, betting I would crumble under embarrassment. My nieces stood nearby, their fishing poles still in hand, looking at the tape like someone had stolen their playground. That was the moment my rage tipped into something deeper. Karen wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was stealing from 10. My family's soul. I ripped the tape down with shaking hands, every shred of plastic snapping like a vow in my chest. My brother stormed toward Karen's house, but I grabbed him by the arm. "No," I said, my voice low, almost a growl. "We don't fight her on her terms. We fight her with truth." That night, I sat at my desk until midnight, gathering every piece of evidence I could, the original deed. Survey maps from the county, photographs showing our family using the lake long before the HOA even existed. I filed an official complaint with the county clerk's office, attaching documents that proved Karen and her board had no claim over my land. For once, I felt like I was gaining ground. But deep inside, I knew paperwork alone wouldn't crush Karen. She didn't fear laws. She feared exposure. She thrived when people were silent. What she couldn't survive was the truth being dragged into the light where everyone could see. The turning point came unexpectedly. On Friday evening, the single mom I had invited over earlier stopped by with a trembling voice. "I know what she's doing to you," she whispered. "She did the same to me, fined me until I nearly lost my house. I have the letters, the emails." She handed me a folder. My chest tightened as I flipped through it. Karen's bullying laid out in black and white. Arbitrary fines, threats, shaming words typed in bold font. My brother's eyes lit with fire. This is it. This is the proof people need. Word spread quickly. Within 2 days, more neighbors showed up at my door with their own stories. One after another, they handed me paperwork, photographs, even recordings of Karen berating them. My dining table became a battlefield of evidence. And for the first time, I saw fear in Karen's eyes from a distance. Her power base was cracking. But she didn't fold. She doubled down. On Sunday morning, as my father sat by the lake humming his old tune, Karen herself marched down again, binder in hand, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you can rally people against me? You're only making this worse for yourself," she hissed. Her eyes darted toward my father, her lip curling. "Do you really want to put him through this stress? He doesn't look strong enough for a fight." My chest froze. For a second, I saw red. To use my father, his frailty, his condition, as leverage was lower than I thought even Karen could go. My father looked at her, then at me, his eyes steady despite the weakness in his body. "Don't let her win, son," he whispered. His words were thin, but they cut deeper than anything Karen had just thrown. I turned to her, my voice steady but filled with something she hadn't heard before. "This isn't about a lake anymore, Karen. This is about every person you've bullied, and when the county hears the evidence we have, you won't be able to hide behind that binder anymore." For the first time, I saw it, the crack. Just a flicker in her eyes, a tiny shadow of doubt. She turned sharply and stormed away, but I knew something had shifted. That night, sitting with my brother and father, I laid out the evidence. "We're not just fighting for us anymore," I said. "We're fighting for every family she's crushed." My brother leaned forward, his fist clenched. "Then let's make it count. Let's bring everything into the light." And so, we planned. The next HOA meeting wasn't going to be like the last. This time, it wouldn't just be my voice against hers. It would be the voice of a community finally ready to stand. But as I looked at my father, frail and pale under the lamplight, I silently begged time to give him enough strength to see this through, because I knew this fight wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about legacy. The night of the second HOA meeting felt different from the first. When I walked into the clubhouse, the air wasn't just tense, it was alive. People weren't sitting quietly with folded hands anymore. They were restless, whispering, passing papers between them. The folder of evidence I had built with my neighbors had grown into a stack so thick it barely fit in my hands, and I wasn't carrying it alone. The single mom walked in right beside me, her jaw tight with determination. The veteran followed, medals pinned to his jacket like he had something to prove again. Even the elderly couple, usually too timid to speak above a whisper, showed up arm in arm, holding their own stack of fines and notices Karen had shoved down. Their throats for years. Karen, of course, sat at the head table again. But her face was tight, her smile strained, her binder gripped so hard her knuckles turned white. She tried to begin the meeting like always, tapping her pen against her notepad, to demand silence. But this time, no one hushed. The room belonged to us before a single word was spoken. I stood, heart pounding but voice steady, and placed the stack of evidence on the table so hard it echoed through the room. "These are not just my records," I said, looking straight into Karen's eyes. "These are the stories of this entire community. Every letter you wrote, every fine you forced, every threat you made. We've all lived under your thumb long enough, and tonight, it ends." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen snapped back, her voice shrill. "These are isolated incidents, all justified under HOA regulations." But her words stumbled. When the single mom stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is it justified to fine me $500 because my son left his bike on the porch? To threaten foreclosure when I couldn't pay in time? You nearly destroyed us." Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't stop. "This isn't leadership, it's cruelty." The veteran rose next, his voice rough with years of command. "You humiliated me in front of my neighbors because of a flag I fought for. That's not HOA business, that's abuse of power." He dropped copies of his violation letters on the table, the sound sharp, like bullets hitting the floor. One by one, people stood. The elderly couple, the young families, even neighbors I barely knew. Stories filled the room, raw and unfiltered. Stories of humiliation, fear, money drained from families already struggling. Some were crying, others were shouting. And through it all, Karen sat frozen, her carefully built image crumbling with each word. When it was my turn again, I pulled the deed from my jacket and held it high. "And on top of all that, you tried to steal my family's lake. This land is private property, signed, sealed, and recorded in the county archives. You trespassed, you lied. And you tried to take from children, from a grieving family, from a man in his final years of life." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "You tried to break us, but you only made us stronger." The room erupted. Cheers, claps, voices shouting for her removal. Karen tried to bang her gavel, but no one listened. Her face, red and trembling, was a portrait of someone finally realizing the empire she built on fear was collapsing beneath her feet. By the end of the meeting, a petition had been passed around. I watched signatures fill the page, dozens. Then more, until nearly every neighbor had signed. A vote was called, and the words echoed in the room like a sentence being handed down. "Remove Karen as HOA president." The ayes thundered through the clubhouse, drowning out the pitiful handful of supporters she had left. When the final count was read, Karen's reign was finished. But her humiliation didn't stop there. I stepped forward one last time, sliding a copy of the evidence folder toward the board. "This doesn't just stay in this room. The county will have it by morning. Every violation, every abuse, every false fine. She doesn't just lose her position, she answers for it. Karen's eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto mine. For the first time since this began, she had nothing to say. No threats, no smirk, no binder to hide behind. Just silence. When I left the clubhouse that night, neighbors followed me out. Some clapped me on the back, others hugged me. The single mom's son tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Thank you for helping my mom." My throat tightened, and I just ruffled his hair because words weren't enough. At home, my father was waiting on the porch. He had been too weak to attend, but his eyes told me he already knew the outcome. I sat beside him, and when I told him Karen was out, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Good. Now this land can breathe again." But even as I sat there, the weight in my chest didn't lift completely, 'cause I knew Karen and people like her don't just fade away. She'd been stripped of her crown, yes, but in the shadows of her bitterness. I could feel it. She was already planning her next move. The calm after Karen's downfall lasted all of 3 days. For a moment, it felt like we could breathe. Neighbors smiled when they passed by. Kids rode their bikes without fear of fines, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a place where people actually lived, not just endured. My nieces spent hours on the dock, fishing with my brother, their laughter echoing across the lake like a hymn of healing. Even my father, though weaker, seemed lighter. One evening he told me, "It feels like the land finally forgave us." Those words stayed with me. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her don't know how to lose. And sure enough, her shadow crept back into our lives. It began subtly. Anonymous complaints filed against me with the county noise. Violations, supposed unpermitted structures near the lake. Letters in my mailbox with no return address, each one dripping with venom. "You don't belong here. This neighborhood will never be yours. We'll take the lake one way or another." My brother wanted to storm down to her house and confront her, but I stopped him. Karen thrived on chaos. That's what she wanted. But even as I said it, I could feel the pressure building. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was near midnight when I heard the dogs barking. My brother rushed outside first, and I followed. What we found made my stomach drop. Tire tracks carved deep into the grass near the lake, leading right up to the dock. The boards were splintered, smashed in places like someone had rammed into them deliberately. My niece's fishing poles, left leaning there earlier, were snapped in half and tossed into the water. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a message. My brother roared in fury, but my father, he just sat on the porch, staring at the wreckage with tears in his eyes. This was his lake, his legacy, the place where he had poured his love for decades. To see it torn apart like that, it broke something in him. He whispered, almost too faint to hear, "She's trying to erase us." I knelt beside him, my chest burning with a rage so deep it scared me. "She won't win," I promised, though my voice shook. "Not while I'm breathing." The next morning, I filed a police report. The officer who came out shook his head, muttering that without cameras or witnesses, it would be hard to prove who did it. But we both knew. Everyone knew. Karen's car had been spotted near my property. Late at night before she had motive, anger, and the arrogance to believe she could get away with it. Neighbors began rallying again, this time not just with words, but with action. The veteran helped me reinforce the dock, bringing lumber and tools. The single mom watched my nieces so my brother could work beside me. The elderly couple even brought over meals, their quiet way of saying, "We're with you." For the first time, the community wasn't afraid anymore. Karen had pushed too far, and instead of dividing us, she had united us stronger than ever. But Karen's bitterness only deepened. She began lurking at the edges of my property, standing across the road with her arms crossed, glaring. Once, she even shouted, "This isn't over. Loud enough for my nieces to hear, scaring them into tears. It all came to a boiling point. One stormy evening, rain hammered the roof, thunder rolled across the hills, and I found Karen at the edge of my driveway, soaked to the bone, screaming at me. "You think you've won? You think this land will stay yours? I'll take it all. I'll ruin you." Her voice cracked, shrill, almost unhinged. I stepped out onto the porch. My father behind me, frail but steady, my brother at my side. My voice cut through the rain like steel. "Karen, you've lost. The board voted you out. The county has. The proof, and every neighbor here knows what you've done. This isn't your kingdom anymore. It's your graveyard. Walk away before you bury yourself deeper." For a moment, just a moment, I saw fear in her eyes, real fear. But then she turned and vanished into the storm. Later that night, sitting with my father, I asked him if he regretted it, fighting so hard for this land, for this lake. He shook his head slowly. "Son, land isn't just dirt and water. It's memory. It's the laughter of children, the tears of loss, the roots of a family." Karen never understood that. That's why she'll never win. His words settled into me like stone. I knew the battle wasn't over, but I also knew the tide had turned. Karen's desperation was her undoing, and soon it would all come crashing. Down on her dot, the silence after the storm was heavy, but it didn't last long. The HOA board scrambled, calling emergency meetings, sending desperate letters to residents, trying to paint me as some power-hungry landowner who had destroyed their community spirit. But the truth had already seeped out, just like water. Through cracked glass, people knew. They saw. They weren't blind anymore. Karen had pulled too hard, and the thread she tugged had unraveled the entire sweater. The board's lies, the abuse of authority, the shady deals, it all poured out once one person dared to push back. That person was me. Karen didn't take it well. I would see her sometimes, standing on her porch with her arms crossed tight, her face pale, watching me and my family as if she could burn holes through us. The woman who once screamed orders at neighbors now looked hollow. But what she didn't realize was that her power had never been real. It only existed because everyone else was too tired or too scared to fight. Once the illusion broke, she was nothing but a bitter woman with too much time and too little respect. My guests became regulars by the lake. Friends, family, neighbors I trusted, they came with laughter, coolers, fishing rods, and kayaks. The sound of joy replaced the sound of Karen's shouting. On summer nights, we'd sit around a fire by the water's edge, kids roasting marshmallows, adults swapping stories. The lake glowed under the moonlight, and I finally felt what home should feel like. Not just a place to live, but a place where life itself blooms. Karen, though, couldn't let go. She tried to file another complaint with the county. She argued that the lake should be shared property for all residents, even though the deed, maps, and boundaries all proved otherwise. When the county officer came out for the second time, Karen stood there, pointing furiously at me like some villain out of a bad play. But the officer shut her down cold, telling her she had wasted government resources with false claims. Her face crumpled right there in front of everyone. For the first time, she didn't look like the HOA president. She looked like someone who had lost everything. The final blow came at the next HOA election. People were tired of her bullying, tired of the lawsuits she wasted their dues on, tired of her obsession with controlling every blade of grass and every fishing hook. When the votes were counted, Karen was voted out by a landslide. Her name wasn't just scratched off the presidency. It was erased from the community's patience. The new board made it clear that harassment and overreach would never happen again. But I didn't celebrate her downfall with fireworks or parades. I just took my kids down to the lake one evening, We sat by the dock, the sun painting the water in gold, and I felt the weight of years finally lift. I thought about all the moments Karen tried to steal from us, the laughter of my guests, the quiet mornings fishing, the peace of knowing my home was truly mine. She failed. She lost. Not because I fought her with anger, but because I stood firm with truth. Months later, I saw Karen packing boxes into a moving truck. Her house was up for sale. She wouldn't look at me, but I caught a glimpse of her expression. Not rage this time, but regret. She had ruined her own life trying to ruin mine. She could have been a neighbor, even a friend, but she chose war. And she lost. As I stood there watching her leave, my daughter slipped her hand into mine. "Daddy, is it over?" she asked softly. I looked out at the lake, the water calm and endless, and I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. It's over." But deep down, I knew it was more than just the end of a battle. It was a lesson written in the soil of my land, in the ripples of my lake, that some people will try to claim what isn't theirs. But if you hold your ground, if you remember what's rightfully yours, they can't take it. They'll break themselves trying. That night, under the stars, I whispered to myself the words that had once stopped Karen cold in her tracks. "It's my private land." And this time, it wasn't just a statement. It was victory.